And so the trial commentators, there's no such thing as a right way rather to try a case, but there are wrong ways. And so the trial commentators, when they're saying they could be doing this, they could be doing that, they're damn right. And sometimes your strategy changes on a dime in court. You may go into the room thinking I'm going in that direction, and somebody will drop the ball or do something screwy, and in a heartbeat, you change course.
All right, we are joined today with a legendary, and I say legendary from time to time, but this truly is a legendary trial lawyer, trial attorney, Norm Pattis, also known as Defender of the Despised. How are you doing?
I'm well. What an intro. Now, can we quit now while we're ahead?
It's perfect. I try not to dwell too long, and I don't like doing a long biography because I want it to come out in the interview versus in the introduction. You seem to be on a short list of some pretty major names. F. Lee Bailey, Jerry Spence, both of whom contributed to at least one of your books. Is the trial lawyer dying out?
So I was blessed in life as a fatherless child to acquire the patronage of powerful men. Jerry Spence, I ran around with him at his ranch in Wyoming in the 90s. F. Lee Bailey became a pretty good friend. We worked cases up and down the East Coast. He'd invited me to his 100th birthday party and assured me that he'd live, but the MF died at 86 or 87. So that's a promise unkept. Most of us unkeep those promises. I think there's a lot of talk in the literature about the vanishing trial. In order to be a trial lawyer, you've got to go to court. You've got to try cases. It takes thousands of hours to learn how to perfect a voice and to perfect your craft, meaning the law of evidence and whatnot, and in laws of procedure. The great press and emphasis on pleading cases out in the criminal side or settling civil cases makes trial time hard to get. When I was coming up 30 or so years ago, I'd try, and that was in federal court typically. Now you find a lawyer that tries one or two in a year, and he's considered gung-ho. So I think trial is a vanishing art. Whether that's good or bad, I don't know. But we who have grown long in the tooth at the bar look at those rising behind us and wonder who's going to carry the mantle. It's not clear.
Interesting. Now, there's always a fiction versus reality aspect of things, and I just have to ask you, have you ever seen the film from 1989 with James Woods and Robert Downey Jr. called True Believer?
I have.
Would you be insulted if I say you resemble the lead character that James Woods plays in the movie?
Now you make me want to watch it again. Watching films about the law is always frustrating because as well as they do, in order to make it entertaining, they have to cut corners. But the bottom line is there's nothing like being in a courtroom and speaking for your client. The stakes are often enormous, and the charge that you've been given is to represent your client's interest before the world at large. And sometimes the whole world watches while you do it. It's a unique blessing, and it's also a crushing burden. Many lawyers succumb to alcohol and drug problems. I've been blessed that way, but it's not a calling for the faint of heart.
I'm a former soldier. I never saw any action, but would the parallel to war fit into a trial, as in hours and hours of complete boredom punctuated by moments of sheer terror?
That part, yeah. I was going to say it's not like war in the sense that I always walk out of the courtroom there. So there's a famous anecdote about trial lawyers. Guy tries a criminal case. This guy gets convicted to life. The lawyer thought, we got a shot. You're doing life. Lawyer says, what do we do now? The lawyer says to the client, well, you're going to jail. I'm going to have a drink. And so lawyers always walk out. We live to fight another day. And it's easy to forget that in the heat of battle. A good friend and I called the heat of battle advocatitis. You so identify with your cause that if you go into a courtroom and you lay it all out on the line, you will come out a different person. If you win, you're elated. If you lose, you're crushed. And victories are ecstatic or ecstasy-driven. Losses are crushing. There is a lot of boredom in trial prep. Sometimes the laying of evidence. Here's a funny story. Everything becomes a funny story in the end. Many years ago, my best friend, I call him a brother, tries personal injury cases. I try murder cases. So he wanted to learn how to try a murder case. I wanted to make some money for a change. So I thought I'll try car cases. So we hung around with each other, and he tried a couple murder cases with me. He had the time of his life. I walked out of the first car accident case after the first day because I was bored to death. Watching somebody else try a case is like watching ice melt, but when you're in the game, the laying of evidentiary foundations, making sure that every I is dotted and T is crossed. It's not boring, but it's exhausting. So, I recently came off a 5.5 month trial in Washington, D.C., involving the Proud Boys and seditious conspiracy. And there were 8 defense lawyers for 5 defendants and 5 government lawyers. The courtroom was as big as a couple tennis courts, and there were special microphones and phones and whatnot to handle every contingency. That did get boring from time to time because I'm used to being the star of the show. So one of my co-counsel and I, a guy named Steve Metcalf out of New York City, we developed Ultimate Persona, and we did running commentary on the trial when it was boring. I became Nigel and he became Rupert. So one of the lawyers was particularly harsh on the judge, and so when things got heated, I'd say, "Nigel, here we are in the pivotal drama in courtroom 23 in the Pretty Man Courthouse in Washington, D.C. The hurricane so-and-so," I'm not going to mention this person's name, "hurricane so-and-so is moving from a minor wind to gale force to catastrophic proportions. Will the judge finally lose his feces and hold this lawyer in contempt? That is the question for the hour." And we went back and forth. So yeah, I guess so. I guess that was boredom, and that was how we coped with it.
No, it makes sense. It's just something I wonder because not everything seems like it's exciting. I understand the long-term strategy. So if you're strategy minded that, okay, I'm doing this now, this is going to pay off down here, things like that. But definitely watching it can be rough.
Yeah,
and
it is. And court reporting is typically awful. I think that court reporters do their best. One thing I learned is never to pay much attention to court reporting. When I was first coming up and I'd have a case in the newspaper, I'm like, "Oh, how cool. I'll get insight into how the case looked." It didn't resemble what I was seeing. And so I learned that really the only thing that matters in a jury trial is your relationship with the jury. Are they prepared to listen to you? Are they hearing what you have to say? And sometimes you're more or less successful. Sometimes you succeed and your client's just guilty. I'll never forget a case once, a young man who shot another person in the head over a girl. It's always over a girl. And 3 witnesses right there, 2 of them knew him for life. He did it. And I did my best. He couldn't accept a plea. And in the end, he was sentenced to 45 years in prison, which was 15 less than the max. After he was sentenced, one of the jurors called me shaking with rage. "Why didn't you tell us? Why didn't you tell us what could happen?" And I said, "Because the law doesn't permit us to do. But let me ask you a question. Knowing what you know now, what was the verdict, guilty or not?" And she paused for a moment and said, "Guilty." So, it's tough. It's tough in there.
Yeah, that's for sure. Now, it's interesting. You mentioned trial reporting, and you're getting into the YouTube game a little bit and podcasting, et cetera. What are your thoughts? Because I find it to be relatively new about the YouTube lawyers who are reporting on trials. For example, the Kyle Rittenhouse trial. I don't know if you watched any of that with the different lawyers' opinions running a live commentary throughout the entire trial.
I aspire to developing a life of ease such that I can sit back with a bottle of seltzer water and watch another trial and do live commentary. I go to court almost every day. The pandemic slowed it down some. I don't think there's any harm in it. I'm aware that in the Alex Jones case, there was live reporting on the trial. And I did see a little of that because things got a little hot and heavy between the judge and I, not in a way that you want to get hot and heavy with a woman. And I thought it was ideologically driven because they were sympathetic to Jones. I was portrayed to be a hero. I don't know if there was trial coverage that was sympathetic to the Sandy Hook parents. The thing that I've learned is that it's almost impossible to shed your biases. And so much of what goes on the internet right now is not valuable. Like I think, and I hope I don't offend anybody here, but I look at Dan Bongino screaming at people all day. And it's just take a breath. Find the space between the nouns and add a little subtlety. People are screaming into the net rather than talking about issues and rather engaging with those issues to understand nuance. And I think a lot of that goes on with trial reporting, and it's troubling to me. I think people are interested in courtrooms. They're interested in trials. I think what they want to understand is what's going on in the room, and it's not always obvious.
Yes, that's where I actually enjoy. I hang out with all these YouTube lawyers, but at least having somebody saying they could be doing such and such because that's commonly done. Some of that inside baseball, I think, is very interesting. Or they could reach into their own experience. And I'm guessing that they're right, at least some of the time, on what's going on in the background.
I'm sure they're right all of the time. So how do you develop a case for trial? I'm getting ready to go to trial in a fraud case, a criminal fraud case in a week or so in Danbury. And so we have all of the information that the state is required to give us, and we're pouring through it. That's called discovery. We've got the search warrant, which is a plain and short statement of the offense and the crimes and the reasons to believe that there's probable cause, some good reason to believe the person did it. And so now we are looking at these isolated facts. We're looking at the legal definition of the crime, and we're trying to imagine the evidence that will come in. So what foundations will they lay to get this document in? Will they do this? Will they do that? If we object on such and such a grounds, will they have an answer? And could that answer be to our detriment? So it's like a game of multidimensional chess. You look at the evidence, and then you ask yourself, what do I want to see happen here? And can I use the evidence to make my point? The more sublime art of trial is not just, I always tell the young lawyers in my office, I've had dozens, maybe hundreds at this point, cycle through. And I always say, go to trial to win. If you can't win, object a lot. Preserve errors for appeal, because we'll do pretty good on appeal. We like our odds on appeal. I've done hundreds of appeals, including all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. And if you can't do either of those, force error. Find an area where the law seems to be at variance with itself, or it's unclear, and push the judge to make a decision. That's what separates the experienced trial lawyers from the novices, the ability to force error. And so the trial commentators, there's no such thing as a right way to try a case, but there are wrong ways. And so the trial commentators, when they're saying they could be doing this, they could be doing that, they're damn right. And sometimes your strategy changes on a dime in court. You may go into the room thinking I'm going in that direction, and somebody will drop the ball or do something screwy, and in a heartbeat you change course. And so I think you make me wish that I was watching trial commentary. I'm sure I could learn a lot from the lawyers who are doing it, but I'm still trying cases.
It's interesting. It popped in my head, and I had to look up the quote. It's Carl Sandburg. But if the facts are against you, argue the law. If the law is against you, argue the facts. If the law and the facts are against you, pound the table and yell like hell. Is that kind of what you were saying?
Yes and no. That's artless. A warrant, you get a new case. You read the factual allegations. If every fact that they've alleged is true, is it nonetheless not a crime? So, for example, if I were to be charged with breaching the peace because I was born on a certain day in 1955, that's how old I am, I have a big nose and a big mouth, would that be a crime? No. So you move to dismiss. If all those facts are true, do they nonetheless amount to a crime, and how's the state going to prove it? Maybe my nose isn't all that big. I know at least one or two women in the course of my lifetime who thought me handsome. Then the next question is, if the facts and the law are against you, can you be creative? And I don't say you holler, but like, for example, there's the silent appeal to jury nullification. Jury nullification is saying to a jury explicitly, yeah, the prosecution could bring this case. Yes, it did bring this case. And yes, the evidence amounts to a crime, but they shouldn't have done it. Now, that practice is prohibited in almost every jurisdiction in the United States, including the federal courts. But yet, if you can appeal to justice, and you can appeal to a jury's sense of there being the consciousness of the community, the representative of the community, sometimes you can get a verdict against the weight of the law. And I'd say never holler at the jury. They don't want to be hollered. They don't want to watch you pounding on the table. Seduce them. That's what they want. They want somebody to trust.
That is awesome. That kind of leads into a couple of things. I've listened to different interviews, et cetera. I found it very intriguing because I interview a lot of body language experts, police interrogators, things like that. You had mentioned when picking a jury, you're looking for bounce. And I really like that terminology, and I'm hoping you can explain that.
So imagine, yes, I can. I'll try at least. I think jury selection, the theory of jury selection comes down to one word, bounce. We are all fundamentally mammals, and we share with bats our checking out a room. And so imagine that you walk into a reception or a bar and there are 50 people standing there. After 40 minutes or 30 minutes, you'll find yourself talking to someone, and that person, and you'll go home saying, nobody likes me. I mean, that does happen. But if you remain, you will settle on someone. How does that process of settling happen? I would say that's the person that resonates with you, or with whom you resonate. You walk up to me. Hi, my name's Eric. Yeah, my name's Mark. Fuck you. Okay, next person. You walk up to the next person. Hi, my name's Eric. Yeah, my name's Joe. Nice to meet you. The guy turns away. No bounce there. Have you ever seen someone with kind eyes that you couldn't stop staring into or looking at? Have you ever experienced a person whose body language you experienced as an open hand rather than a fist? And so that's being in the presence of a welcoming presence. And that's a person who you feel safe with. And that's a person who you choose to talk to. So in the process of jury selection, I think a wise lawyer looks for bounce. We used to teach this at the Spence Trial Lawyers College. You want to be open to the jury. You don't want to stand there with your hands over your nuts because it looks like you're trying to hide the family jewels. So you stand openly and you tell them a little bit about yourself that's revealing, if the judge will let you get away with it. And then they're free to talk to you. And then in the course of working with them, what you're evaluating is whether they'll listen to you. Because a trial, especially a criminal trial, is a terrifying experience. I often read with clients Psalm 23, the King James Version. You're going to walk them through the valley of the shadow of death. And really, I've used that as a theme for closing arguments and modified the psalm for closing arguments. So what you want is a jury that will resonate with you. You sense when you're getting it back, it's that phenomena of being in the bar. And when you get it back, they'll listen. And they may listen and reject you because you're wrong. Your trial isn't an athletic competition. I try a lot of tough cases. Oh, you lost that case. Yeah, I did. When the witness saw him throw his 7-month-old child off the bridge and he gloated about it to his girlfriend, what did you want me to do? Alibi? He was in Toledo deep sea fishing. There's no deep sea in Toledo, and there was no defense in that case. But we had to try it because he couldn't accept the plea. But I worked hard to resonate with the juror. I looked hard to get them to listen. And I've gotten wonderful notes back from jurors, win, lose, or draw. They've looked me up afterwards. So I know that it's working.
What I'm interpreting from this, and I appreciate, is it sounds to me like you're not even really looking to say, this person is a typical authority type figure and worries about authority or bends to authority. It sounds like you're just looking for somebody who will listen. So who, if you have the ability to communicate with them, then you may be able to change their mind or to come to a discovery together.
Connecticut, where I try most of my cases, is unique in the world. We have what's called individual sequestered voir dire, which means that we can speak to each potential juror out of the presence of others, often for as long as it takes. I usually am 15 minutes. There are some lawyers who take an hour with each juror. And so you really get to know people there. I'm not saying these sociological characteristics and whatnot don't matter, but I think those work largely for federal or cattle call jury selections where you don't get a chance to talk to people. You've got to have something. They're a proxy for attitude. But in the course of a jury trial, especially a tough jury trial, you're trying to show people a truth that may challenge their preconceptions. Consider what the law is. The law is a set of rules designed to govern large numbers of people. And those rules and concepts govern things that typically recur. Lawyers would refer to them as fact patterns. Those fact patterns take place under a bell-shaped curve. So the bell defines 80 to 90% of what occurs. But there are tails. And what takes place beneath those tails is true. And sometimes you've got to take a jury out from the comfort zone that represents what a reasonable person would do in the bell-shaped curve and show them a truth. So an example that's I've had 2 cases that have stunned me in my career. I won them both. One involved a guy who was accused of murder. He was out with his uncle. The uncle took a gun, fired, didn't know he hit the guy after a pair of tennis shoes were stolen. This is the so-called tennis shoe murder case. The cops came to my client's house the next day. He told them he had shot. He didn't realize the guy had been hit. He signed a statement saying he pulled the trigger. He lied to protect his uncle, who was with him, and had his uncle had a felony conviction, couldn't be a gun. It would have been a conviction. Only after he signed the signature did they say, you killed somebody, it's murder. So I had him testify on the witness stand in court that he lied under oath. So he testified under oath that I lied under oath. Counterintuitive as hell, because the cross-examination was, which liar are we supposed to believe? And I trusted the truth in that client and asked the jury to do so, and they did, and he was acquitted. Another case, and that was outside the shadow of the bell. Another case that amazed me involved a young man named Kevin King. This was probably in 99 or so. He faced the death penalty in Connecticut for the rape and murder of his girlfriend. The state didn't get the death penalty, but they got life. So he was at a community correctional center getting ready to be moved to the Supermax, and he decided he'd try to escape. So he lured a guard into his cell who was about his size, knew what the guard drove in the parking lot because he listened, demanded that the guard give him the uniform the guard was wearing. And when she didn't, he stabbed her in the chest with a shank, put her uniform on, gagged her, bound her to his bed, and started to walk out the building. He cleared all but one checkpoint when they spotted him. They chased him to the bottom of a hall. He fell on his shank. He thought it pierced his heart, and they smacked him around. So I get a call from the public defender's office. Would I bring a claim against the guards for the beatdown? Sure. So I asked the jury to hold the guards accountable and put my client on the stand in his prison uniform, didn't acknowledge everything he was convicted of, everything he did, and said to them, somebody's got to protect us from the sort of, you are the guardians of society. And when the guards behave like the people were being protected from, something's wrong. They gave my client a $2.1 million verdict. And all he had was a busted orbital socket, which you could get walking into a door, and some bruises. Those cases, it illustrated to me that under the bell-shaped curve, there is a land of reasonable expectations, but a jury is prepared to follow if the truth is outside the curve. And they do.
Okay, the Kevin King case that you were just talking about, I actually wanted to bring that one up along with some others because I'm curious, because you have Kevin King and Tony Marino, I think you've also mentioned.
Yeah, the bridge case.
As we've been talking. Yeah. Both did acts that would be considered despicable by most. Right. I mean, they did do these things. I am curious if the hate level that you have received about Alex Jones is equivalent or greater than the two individuals we just brought up.
Kevin King, I was a baby lawyer on my way up and was so swallowed by the adrenaline of the ride, I didn't notice anything. I got a call from the O'Reilly factor. I don't, unfortunately, get a chance to see much television. It's not that I'm better than it, but there are only so many hours in the day, especially as I've gotten older. I got to get my sleep. So I didn't know who the O'Reilly factor was. So I go up to a Fox studio in Hartford, and they got the green screen or whatever. And all of a sudden this guy's screaming in my ear, and I started screaming back. So I didn't notice that one. The Moreno case, the baby over the bridge case, people keyed my car in the parking lot. I got a lot of hate mail. And we've always responded to hate in the office with humor. And I now do stand-up comedy as a relief, a window into the sort of tragicomedic human soul. And these are true things that I've said to actual calls. Guy sends a note. I hope you die of ass cancer. I write back to such a note. Why would I need ass cancer when I have you? Another person, common line is, how do you sleep at night? I count morons. You're number 149. Next. Or you're a loser. I didn't see you in the front row of the last Mensa convention I was asked to keynote. And I say that, but it hurts. The Alex Jones, and it hurts deeply. And it is devastating, frankly. I think my involvement in the Alex Jones case and the hatred that is garnered, the Proud Boys and the hatred it has garnered, I think that had a corrosive effect on a woman who I will soon be divorced from. I think that that is what it is. I think she came to see me as a repository of these things. And she had a profession puts her in the public eye. And she would ask me not to take cases of this sort. She would ask me, why do you need always to fight these impossible cases? Why do you never back down? And then she would ask me to avoid commenting on things that I was interested in. And I felt like we separated and got back together over 8 years. Here's a funny story. You're in trouble when your marital counselor's best advice is live in separate houses, get together when you can, and talk about what's comfortable to you. So I've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on marital therapy rather than preparing for a retirement. Rather than buying Golden Pond, I bought myself a marital minesweeper. And now I'm out from under that, and it feels good. I sleep in a house where I don't feel judged, and I'm able to get away from it all. But it is crushing, and I won't pretend otherwise. I believe that no one is the sum of their worst moments. I came up in the school of hard knocks, and there was no one there for me. There were periods in my life where I felt very much alone and despised in my own home by my mother's lovers, among other things. And I'm drawn. I'm drawn to the person in that position, and that is my vocation, and I intend to stick with it.
You've told a really touching story, and I'm very close to YouTube lawyer Nate the Lawyer, and he has an extremely tough childhood and background, all the way to he lost his eye, essentially, because of everything happened with his childhood and how he's brought up. But he tells a wonderful story about Thanksgiving, and some people cared for him. But you also have a story of, I believe his name is Mr. Stiger.
Yeah, I was thinking.
And I find that really touching because while things can be dark, I think it's amazing when there is an island of light in the midst.
I like to say I put the psycho in psychoanalysis. I've been at it for about 17 years, 4 days a week. I figure between psychoanalysis and marital counseling, I got about $1 million into trying to ride the shit that's inside of me. Oh, to have it now in the stock market. I could be fishing on Golden Pond, but I don't think the fish need my help. Others do. My father disappeared when I was 7. My mother disappeared emotionally. I was sent to live with relatives. When she reemerged, we lived in attics, rooming houses, and very unusual circumstances with casts of characters that could fill a book and maybe someday will. She had the sense to know that I needed a little more than she can give. So she got me involved in the Big Brothers program in Detroit. And Herbert Stiger was my big brother for 3 or 4 years. He was a congressional candidate, a lawyer, as luck would have it. He lived with his family in Grosse Pointe. And once or twice a month, I would do something with him and his family. He had a son, Rick, just a year younger than me. And once a month, I'd spend the weekend at his place. My mother had a tendency to leave Friday nights, put some money on the table, and I'd see her Saturday or Sunday whenever she ran out of gas. So Rick would come sometimes and spend those weekends, and we would play board games together, basically Stratomatic baseball, Stratomatic football, free advertisement here. But I always knew that if Mr. Stiger said he would meet me at a certain location at 5 o'clock on a Friday, he would. And it changed my world because I got found and cared for. And I could go to his house, and his wife would say I made her feel like a good cook because we didn't eat family meals where I grew up. And we'd sit at a table and they'd say grace, and I'd eat. And I had
time to eat. Let's go.
And so he had such a great influence on me. Now, in high school, you couldn't talk to me. I was like most kids, out and about, a rambling wreck of a human being. We partied hard in Detroit. My mother didn't much care where I was, so there were mornings I'd wake up in a parking lot thinking, how the fuck did I get here? Because we'd had a good time the night before. I went off to college and turned out to be a good student. Who knew? So when Mr. Stiger died, he died during the Moreno trial, I think. He died during jury selection. I asked for permission to go to his funeral and offer a word of thanks to he and his family for showing me love. I don't know if I had the balls to call it that at the time, but I would now. And it's so funny how your perspective changes. I'd go out to their house on the weekends, and I think it was a mansion. It was a colonial on 1/3 of an acre with 4 bedrooms, but it was spacious and clean. Now I've lived and owned spectacular homes on a lodge in Vermont, 500 acres, an estate in Connecticut, place my wife owns, or Judy, how long she'll be my wife, that's up to the courts. This former wife of mine, beautiful places on the Cape. In fact, I want to give your readers or listeners a treat here. Repeat after me. Micturation. He is not a stand-up comic in an Italian supper club. Micturation is the art of urinating. And so how do you know? How do you know you have white male privilege? You can micturate outside your home every night you get home because you have no neighbors. And I've evolved into a state of blessed affluence in spite of everything. And I think Mr. Stiger and his steadfast devotion to caring for a stranger changed my life. And it's a wonderful thing, the Big Brothers program.
I can totally see that, especially if you questioned everybody out there. If there's any legitimate human beings, he proved to you that, yes, there are legitimate good people. And it's worth it.
A good friend of mine.
Give people a chance.
A good friend of mine is going to celebrate their 36th anniversary in Alcoholics Anonymous this weekend, and they have evolved to a point in their life where they spend their time providing care for others. They'll drop everything to go deal with someone in crisis. And I am so moved by it. That strikes me as the highest form of a spiritual vocation, to be there for others. That there's a warmth and generosity of spirit that's hard to comprehend.
This is on a very minor level, but I heard in an interview that you're a runner or were a runner or something of that sort. I actually am a lapsed runner with 4 marathons of 50K and a ton of 13.1s or half marathons. One thing that I found with the half marathons is one thing to finish the race, but after a while I started to volunteer and I was a pace group leader. And I think there's something to it, and I don't know if you can relate, but I can cross the finish line one time by myself. But when I'm running with a pace group and we're all talking and working together to get people across for a personal best, I feel like I crossed the finish line, however many of them there are.
Interesting. So I go in and out of fitness. When I was turning 60, I thought I'd run one last marathon. And so I dropped a bunch of weight, trained hard for a couple of years, but just couldn't put the time in that I wanted to. And I ran some decent halves. I ran 240s, which for an old man isn't bad. I'm not going to set the world on fire, but I always overtrain and then get exhausted. And so what'll happen to me is I'll drop 70 pounds training, and I'm loving having to eat to keep the weight on. I'll get overtired and I'll keep eating and put some of that weight back on. So I'm on the heavy side right now. And I don't know, for me, I guess you can't see it in the background. I keep a Peloton in my office, and I try to keep the stress off with sleep and exercise. And I don't know if I'll run again.
One thing I wanted to cover, because I noticed in a lot of the interviews with you, Alex Jones would come up. And everybody has made a decision about Alex Jones before they even hear the facts. It seems like the narrative has been out there so long. So I wanted to step back and what is the case that you would have argued for Alex Jones, but you were not allowed?
This is the 5th anniversary this month of my involvement with Alex's life. I have some appellate work pending for him now. We'll get decisions probably in the summer. By the time I came in, he was on the defensive with discovery violations and never caught a break. But I think my case would be that there is something broken in the United States right now. Look at the narratives by both the right and the left and look at the life you live. There's a massive disconnect, and we don't understand why. Jones had ideas about Sandy Hook that people in Connecticut know not to be true. But what explains the fact that so many around the country are prepared to believe that what Jones said is right? I got hate mail in that case from people on both sides of the aisle. Some thought I was too reasonable. I should be trying to exhume the graves of the kids because there's nobody there. People still believe this stuff. So I would say of Jones the same thing that I say of Donald Trump. They're canaries in the mine shaft, and we need to focus on the mine shaft because something is broken. The lives we live don't reflect or correspond to the reality we use to describe them. And penalize Jones if you must for uttering things we know to be untrue, but what harm did he really cause? And so I would have focused on causation and said that he didn't prove anywhere near $1 billion. No, he didn't cause anywhere near $1 billion in damage. And to get that kind of money in this case, the plaintiffs had to rely on a sort of pathetic fallacy. At some point, the Sandy Hook families, grievous though their losses, are going to have to learn to pick up their beds and walk because we're all broken in the end by life. And few of us get an oasis in terms of the world's regard. Most people bear their suffering in silence, and making a public display of Sandy Hook is just wrong, in my opinion.
I'm curious about one main element about Alex Jones, and I feel like this can never get out. I constantly hear he deliberately did this, deliberately attacked them, deliberately smeared them. My question is, do you feel that Alex Jones deliberately said these things or was mistaken in a belief?
I read a lot of books on conspiracy theories to help understand them. Joseph Yasinski's work, for example. Anna Merlin did a good book, The Republic of Truth, I think it's called, or Lies or something. I can't recall the title. Life happens, and narratives harness life in forms we can understand. And people are driven to create narratives for whatever reason. I don't think Alex, and so the Sandy Hook families believed that there was some secret marketing plan. I call this the strong theory of disinformation here, that Alex had a secret team who would deliberately and intentionally sow mistruths in order to produce clicks on their website, which were transformed into sales. There's no evidence that took place that I'm aware of. And I spent months down there and got to meet everybody in the shop, and I had unlimited access to whatever it is they cared to show me. I mean, I didn't get to see the bodies buried out back. Nobody told me about them. Was there a weak theory? Did from time to time they say, shit, that story really made us pop? And did they decide to go back to the story because of that? Probably. Everybody, you're familiar with the concept of clickbait. So I'm sure they did the clickbait thing. Deliberate. I don't think he woke up one day and said, I'm going to make a buck off these dead kids. No, I don't think that happened for a moment. I think that Alex has always been a conspiracy theorist. In terms of the trajectory of his career, his first big story was Waco in 93 and the government burning of the Branch Davidian compound. And he went on from there to other stories. And there are those who question authority, those who don't believe the grand narrative of American life, those who believe there is a secret cabal of people controlling things. And that paranoid style in American politics runs deep and runs long. I don't know if there's a way to break that mold. I have this podcast I do with Mike Boyer, who you were gracious enough to have on with me on your show last Friday. It's called Law and Legitimacy at LawPod Daily, from advertising here. And we try to engage in discussions about a Ciceronian ideal. The Roman orator Cicero said that a community isn't every random collection of individuals. It's people bound together by common conceptions of right. And we've lost common conceptions of right, and I don't know why. And I think somehow to restore the American soul, we have to make our rhetoric conform to the reality that we experience, and we're not there. Something got detached. Is it social media? I don't know. But Alex is part of that whirlwind. Dan Bongino is another part of it. There are people who are on fire. And when they speak, it's never, hello, how are you? It's, hello, how are you? And we need to ditch the imperative mood. But that's Alex.
Yeah, and it's always a hard thing because social media does help reinforce this. There have been multiple studies done. For example, if you want something to go viral, the number one trick is to induce rage or anger. Sadly, it's something that is funny, that'll do okay. Something that's sad will die on the vine. But if you can induce rage or anger, that's the clickbait, a rage bait. And it is a sense.
And I've fallen into it from time to time. Every now and then I'll get on Twitter and I don't recognize the person I become. And here's the great example. It's embarrassing, but it's true. And I'm an old man, so what's the point in hiding the truth? I tend toward Islamophobia. I have said such thing as I don't see people flocking to Muslim countries for a better life. I see Muslims coming to the United States, fleeing the life they have and asking us to accept the life they're fleeing. Doesn't make any sense to me. And so I am susceptible to that strain in American life. But yet I do a lot of traveling around the country for one reason or another. And more often than not, I'm in a cab with a driver, a Muslim person from an African country, who tells me such a touching and warm story that in the handshake where we say farewell, I feel unmasked as a complete hypocrite and humbled by the fact that I don't recognize my prejudice in the person whose hands I just shook. And the gap between those performative exercises of mine on Twitter, send them back. And I don't think I've gone that far, but the attitude and the embrace that I'll give a cab driver at the end of just a 20, 30-minute ride, it has me scratching my head.
That's interesting. I wanted to discuss with you because you defended the Proud Boys. You've defended Alex Jones, which I'm sure has attached a right-winger label to you in some fronts. But my thought is that if I was going to call you anything, I'd almost call you an old school liberal, a Dershowitz type, somebody who. No,
Dershowitz is a Pattis type. Let's get this right. Let's get the archetypes right.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. He's older.
Yeah, but that's all right. I got there second.
Okay. But 20 years ago, you would have been defending somebody, or actually 40 years ago, if you were around practicing under Reagan, you might well be fighting the Reagan administration and the conservatives to help defend a client. Would that be fair to say? Like a Larry Flint. I could see you defending Larry Flint or his type just as much as Alex Jones.
I don't think I changed. I think the world changed. One of the things that ended my marriage was that we don't have a final decree yet. I call her my ex-wife, but my former companion's family was to the left, far to the left. Her father did time for pleading the first to the House Un-Americans Committee. Her mother was indicted for conspiring to violently overthrow the United States government as a communist, and her sisters are involved in various left-wing activities. And I was somebody they could be proud of when I was defending black men beaten up by cops, as I did for a decade or so. When I started defending white guys who were bullied, and I started to hear about white privilege, things got a lot quiet at holiday meals, and I just suddenly didn't want to go anymore. And for example, there was a recent wedding shortly before our separation. I was asked not to attend because I'm too controversial. I was told that there would be fights among family members about me. And I'm like, I want to be loved and respected in my home. And when I became a source of controversy in my home, it became something less than a home to me, and I left. I don't think that I changed. I think our politics have changed. And so for me, my guiding principle is there is no mob quite so dangerous as a self-righteous mob. So today I'm doing white men who are being bullied, or at least they perceive themselves to be bullied. I did the Proud Boys, and I don't believe for a heartbeat that they're white supremacists or extremists. I think they're just a bunch of guys who felt that they were losing control of their country and were reacting to that loss. I've gotten to know Enrique Tarrio quite well, Joe Biggs quite well, Zach Rell quite well, and I'm proud to represent him.
On the Proud Boy front, I guess it's one of those that I've been around for a minute in internet culture or whatever. Proud Boys were founded by Gavin McInnes, who also was a co-founder of Vice Media, which is not exactly a right-wing outlet in any way. But it was a joke.
Yeah, that's right. It was.
It was a joke. It was literally about cereal and what kind of cereal you ate. I forget all of it, but it was put in as a mockery. It was like from 4chan, 8chan days or whatever. It was Gavin McInnes is a troll.
So, the cereal thing is one of the initiation rites into the Proud Boys is you get beaten while you recite the names of 5 breakfast cereals or 3. And until you get the names out, they're going to keep banging on you. Gavin's gotten out of it. I don't know Gavin at all. I've seen his show from time to time. But I think there was a wonderful book written in early 2020 that hasn't gotten the attention it deserves. It's Angus Deaton and Ann Case, Deaths of Despair, a couple epidemiologists. And it was published just before the Summer of Love in 2020. And they noted that there was a decline in life expectancy, discernible statistically in the United States, and that it was focused largely in middle-class white Americans in flyover country. And they were dying from 3 things: heart attacks, suicide, drug addictions, and so forth. And this is a thing. And so the question is why? I think it's because they've lost a sense of significance in their own communities, and they're afraid. So in the course of getting to know the Proud Boys, you get to the summer of 2020, you got Trump out there with his Make America Great Again kind of thing. We're undergoing massive changes in the country. In the summer, AntiFa, which is a thing, is out there banging on people, and they wanted to mix it up with Antifa. And hence they armed, and there were confrontations. Does that make them white supremacists, or just does this make them standing up for themselves? I just... there are white supremacists in the country who think that if you're white, you're right, and if you're not. These guys just didn't want to be disrespected in their own home on account of who they are. And I don't think that makes them white supremacists. That rhetoric just falls on deaf ears for me.
No, I personally don't think they are either. And I feel like you mentioned Antifa. I personally have giant problems with anti-stuff. By that, anti-fascist, anti-racist. People use these terms, I feel, to blackmail or corner people into something that they're not. I am not a racist, but I am not an anti-racist. I want nothing to do with either. Same thing with I don't like fascists. I don't want to go hang out with fascists, but that doesn't mean I'm an anti-fascist, because to me, anytime you get onto any extreme, you start to become that thing that you hate.
I think that's right. I love St. Augustine. And Augustine says that sin is love of the wrong thing. So when you embrace your identity, it's a form of idolatry. And you say, I am the pot saying to the potter, why makest me thus? And that's sin. I don't trust anyone. I am a misanthrope. I think that all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. And if I've learned anything in my criminal practice, it is that we all carry demons within us, and that any one of us is capable of the worst that we can do. And we're all saved by grace. I mentioned someone I know who's going to have their 39th anniversary in AA This is a life completely transformed by the spiritual discipline of caring for others. And it's stunning to behold. Stunning, you know.
That's a wonderful note to wrap on, but I always like to ask one last question. What is the one question that I should have asked you, but I did not?
My life has been difficult, and the difficulties are more often than not of my own making. And as I round third and head to home on the gerontological scale, there's no end of fight in me, and I expect to die on my feet, hopefully not soon. And maybe that question would be, what is it that drives you? What is it that you want on an intimate level more than anything? And that is to be known fully for who I am and cherished as a unique work of God, flawed, but doing the best I can in a world that is often filled with darkness. And so I've developed a reputation, apparently. Your intro was quite nice and flattering to the ego. I don't see myself that way. I'm just like every other pilgrim. You know, no matter what gifts you are, we live in a universe that extends infinitely in space and time. And whatever you're in precisely the same position as the man to your left or right, no matter what their gifts, there's an infinity beyond. And so I have been driven to my knees by human folly and uplifted by grace. And if I have one thing left to do in my life, it would be to be an instrument of grace for others. And if I have one hope, it would be to be loved and cherished by someone.
That's a perfect point to end on. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, Eric. This was really a pleasure. Thank you so much.